So when we speak about the day number 5, I just want to remind you about how Walton treated day number 5. Do you remember that he paid attention to the syntax of the verse and especially to the Masoretic signs of the verse? And he said that according to the Masoretic signs, and it is true that according to the Masoretic signs, the Taninim, or the big sea creatures, are excluded from the blessing formula. So do you remember about that? Now, yes, in order to explain why the Masoretes put those signs like this, so that it looks like they intentionally and deliberately excluded Taninim from the blessing formula, I just want to quote for you the Rashi commentaries. And by the way, he took it not from, he didn't make it up, but he refers to Genesis Rabbah, so Midrash, and some other stories. And according to those stories, the great fish in the sea, in the words of the Agadah, this refers to the Leviathan and its mate, for he created them male and female. And do you see, they pay attention to the fact that here is absent yud. So taninim, it is clear this is a plural form. Tanin is a singular form, taninim is a plural form. But in the text, for some reasons, yud is absent, is missing here. And they try to play with, they try to explain why this yud is missing here. And they made a story, of course, as they usually do and they like to do. And they say that God actually created both those animals as a couple. He created them male and female. And he slew the female and salted her away for the righteous in the future. For if they would propagate, the world could not exist because of them. Taninim is written, the final yud, which denotes the plural, is missing. Hence, the implication that the Leviathan did not remain 2, but that its number was reduced to 1. Okay, so it is clear that behind this Taninim there was an entire story, and it is clear that in the rabbinic interpretation, Tanin or Taninim was somehow equated to Leviathan. That is why it was like they had a negative attitude toward this creature, and most probably that is why they put the accents like it is right now, and they try to exclude Taninim from the blessing formula. So is it clear?
Can you come again? There's something I'm not getting clearly.
Okay, again. So you remember that John Walton makes a special argument based on the fact that the Masoretes put Atna here, and by putting Atna here, they excluded Taninim from the blessing formula, which is stated later on in the same verse. So do you remember this? And this story explains why they did like this. So evidently, they had a tradition about Tanin or Taninim. And in this tradition, they equated Taninim with Leviathan, with something bad. So that is why they try to make something with the text to not include Tanin in the formula of blessing. Now it's clear. So because of this tradition, and this tradition, it is written in Genesis Rabbah, so it's quite old tradition, Of course, it had existed before the Masoretes localized the text and put their marks. Is it clear?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, so we can go further. But one thing that is really very surprising in the text is that this Hataninim Hagedolim are mentioned because when we read the account of other creation, no particular species or any particular kind of animals are not mentioned. So no particular species are mentioned, no particular kind of animals are mentioned, but just everything is given in general. So God created in general the plants, not plants, but the earth produced all the plants according to their kinds. After that, we can read in day number 6 that God created animals according to their kinds, and no specific animal is mentioned. But here, for some reasons, those taninim are mentioned. And this is a kind of change of the pattern when the author doesn't follow the pattern, but he introduces a new element, and this element about the taninim. Is it clear?
Yes.
Yes, but Prof, in proper translation, what do we translate this taninim to be? Are they just sea creatures only, or more than that?
Yeah, this is a good question. Because if you look at the different translations, they translate it different in many different ways. So of course we need to look at how this term tanin is used in the Hebrew Bible. And when we look at it, we can find many different issues of the taninim. Some of them are good. Some of them are not. In some of them, taninim are mentioned in a positive, with the positive connotations, but in some of them are not. For example, in Psalm 148, we can see that taninim is positive. Yeah, praise the Lord from the earth, you great sea creatures, taninim and all deeps, tehomot. So in this verse, we can see that even the taninim are called to praise the name of the Lord. So in this case, taninim is not, it doesn't have any negative connotations. But in Exodus 7 and Psalm 91:13, it refers to a kind of serpent that must be much smaller and may be similar to an adder. So do you remember when Moses threw down his stick or his rod, and it was transformed to a serpent? And the Magi of Egypt did the same. Yes, so in this case, we can see that, for example, you will treat on the lion and the adder, the young lion and the serpent, tanin. And tanin here is parallel to the adder. You will trample underfoot. And in Deuteronomy, their wine is the poison of serpents, poison of taninim, and the cruel venom of asps. So do you see, in this context, we can see that tanin has a negative connotation. So it's not anything good, but it's something bad, because they're compared with the serpent and the poisonous serpents. The fact that God blessed all the sea creatures, including tanin or taninim, and also approved the creation, doesn't allow us suggesting that tanin is a somebody opposite to God. However, later on in the Hebrew Bible, tannin is used with the negative connotations, most probably because there is a connection between the tannin and the serpent who tempted the first people. Yes, so later on, and for example, in Isaiah 27 and some other verses, it is true that tannin is associated with the Leviathan. If tannin is associated with the Leviathan, so we can assume that really in the original creation story, we can see that tannin is not negative, because we shouldn't follow the accents of Masoretic system, and in this case we shouldn't follow their understanding that tannin is somehow separated from all other creatures, and it should be excluded from the blessing. No, on the contrary. And do you see all those traditions that try to equate tannin with the something bad, actually comes back to ancient Near East stories like Enuma Elish or Baal epic or Baal cycle. And in all those cycles, we can see that God, in order to create or in order to establish an order, he had to fight with some sea creatures. So that is why we cannot say that this tannin has any mythological connotation, but most probably we need to translate it as some kind of sea creatures that were created, and all of them were created good, as God says that everything that he has done is good. But later on, most probably the tradition, not only tradition, but in the Hebrew Bible, we can see that tannin is somehow associated with the serpent. In this case, we can see that the account of creation in the book of Genesis, when God tells us, or Moses recounts the story of creation, it presupposes or it anticipates the fall that is supposed to happen very soon. Okay, is it clear? So the conclusion is simple. We cannot equate tannin with any kind of mythical creatures. And in the beginning, when God created, tannin was also blessed, and was nothing bad in tannin. But later on, it is associated with the serpent. And we can understand that the mention of tannin in this day of creation is like anticipation of the future rebellion. And one more thing that I also mentioned, it seems to me, but I would like to mention it again. So in Genesis 1:30-31, we can see that God gives dominion, or even earlier, God gives dominion over all fishes and everything that lives in the sea. But it's strange for me, and I don't have any explanation to this, that Adam doesn't give names to all the creatures of the sea. He gives names only to the animals who live on the dry land, but not to the creatures that live in the sea. And of course, it's a little bit enigmatic. So why are they excluded from naming? So it looks like Adam should exercise dominion over the sea, but not as full dominion as on the dry land animals. But honestly, I don't have explanation to this. Of course, we can just explain it that it is not Adam, and we as well are not, the sea is not our place of living. So that is why our control over the sea is just like limited, or I don't know. So that is why they are not called by Adam. And one more thing we need to explain. In this day, the creation of the tanninim and the creation of all the fishes is described as bara. So God created. And the verb bara is used in this case. And of course, it puzzles scholars because we can see that the verb bara is used only several times in the account of the creation. First time in verse 1:1, second time in verse 1:21, and the third time in verse 1:27, and it is used 3 times when the creation of man is described. So why does Moses use the word bara for describing the creation of the sea creatures? Do you have any ideas?
Perhaps to affirm the same creator did create everything, both from sea and land.
Yes, okay, but this verb is not used, for example, for creation animals. For creation animals, the verb asa is used. So it is used only for creating the sea creatures, the man, and just to describe creation in general. So the question is, why does Moses use this verb in this verse 121 for a description of creation of the fishes and all habitats of the sea? Okay, the best explanation that I found for this in the book of Selhammer, Pentateuch's narrative. By the way, I highly recommend you to use this book because it is, of course, we cannot agree with everything what Selhammer said, but this is not a bad exposition. It is a good exposition of the book of Genesis and the book of Exodus especially. So the best explanation that we have, I found in this book, but let me read what Ducan is saying about this. The specific use of the verb bara, create, for the tannin, sea creatures, is surprising, for it is norm a lie associated either with the creation of heaven and earth or the creation of humans. In fact, this association with the tannin belongs to the same cosmic perspective, for the tannin is the sea monster, the divine house monster in the Ugaritic myth of creation. In Isaiah 27:1, it is symbolically identified as the Leviathan, the serpent who is God's enemy. The use of bara, create, betrays, therefore, a deliberate polemic intention directed against the mythological views of the ancient Near East. The ordinary nature of the big serpent is revealed. It is nothing but an animal, a mere fish that was created by God. So what Ducan is saying, that the word bara here emphasizes that it is not a mythical creature or something from the myth, but it is just a mere animal. So we cannot find any connotation of mythological connotation in this verse. And as I said, the best explanation I found in the book of Selhammer, and he says, one suggestion is that the use of the word bara, create, just at this point in the narrative is intended to mark the beginning of a new stage in the creation, namely the creation of the living beings, a group distinct from the vegetation and physical world of the previous 6 days. Each new stage in the account is marked by the use of the verb create, the universe, the living creatures, and human beings. So the idea of Selhammer is that the verb bara is used when the creation comes to a new level. For example, in the first 4 days, we can see that only things that do not have life were created. except of course plants, but plants also, so what is the difference between plants and the animals and the sea creatures? That according to the Bible, all those creatures have a soul, but plants do not have a soul. So in this case, when the creation comes to a new level, the creation of living creatures that have a soul. So in this case, the word bara is used according to Selhammer. Yes, please.
Yes, sir. It's not to draw you back on the translation of Taninim. Is it narrowed down to serpents, or is it a general name for great sea creatures?
So do you see, it's difficult to translate. It's difficult to translate because it is used, as I showed to you, it is used in different explanations. In one thing, it is like something like sea creatures without specification. And in some other cases, it is connected to a serpent. So most probably we can say that this tanin is a kind of a sea creature which is related to a serpent. But of course, we cannot speculate that it is like dinosaurs or anybody else. Yes, we cannot say anything about that. But it is clear that tanin is associated with the serpent. And most probably because of that, they are mentioned in this verse, that he created them, but they were perfect at the moment of the creation.
So, sir, can we conclude then that, can we say that the...
Okay, Prof.
I cannot see Pastor Ladoso.
Yeah,
I can hear.
King James Version translates it as great sea whales.
Like whales.
Yeah, whales.
Yeah, but do you see, we cannot say anything about
that.
So the translation is just an interpretation.
Okay, I'm here to study the kind of fish that swallows Jonah. If it's in the family of the
yes, it is not described as a whale. It is described as a big fish.
Big fish.
Dag gadol.
Okay.
Dag gadol. Yeah. So it is not tanin.
Okay.
The one who swallowed Jonah.
Okay. I'm settled. Thanks, bro.
So that is why this is a very very interesting moment about tanin. So we cannot be sure what it means. Yes, what we can be sure that tanin in the very beginning was perfect. Nothing bad was said about tanin in the very beginning. But later on, tanin is associated with Leviathan. And most probably the author just anticipates the fall of people, and he introduces this tanin. But again, he introduces tanin, but later on in chapter 2, he introduces Nahash, not tanin, just Nahash. Nahash is a serpent, the one who tempted Adam and Eve. So is Nahash relative to tanin or not? The Bible doesn't tell us about that. Okay, so is it clear about bara, usage of bara in 121?
It is, but
121 should be here.
But it is clear, but it requires more reading, Prof.
Okay.
So, Professor.
Yes, please.
I'm sorry to take you back, as Pastor Kajura says, it needs a lot of reading to comprehend. This tanin, I was trying to look at it from the general perspective of the sea creatures, in terms of the creatures that are found in the waters, maybe the fish, the frog, the what. But how I'm getting it here, it's like it's a particular is a particular creature of the sea that sometimes is interpreted as serpent, sometimes. Kindly help me. I still cannot comprehend what is this tannin thing.
Yeah. Okay. So let us go back and try to explain it again. As I said, this is a very enigmatic creature, so we cannot be sure what it means, tannin. So that is why it is translated like sea creatures or big sea creatures, because in the text they called big tanninim gedolim. Yes, let me open the Bible for you.
But Prof, New American Standard Bible translates it as sea monsters.
Oh, yes, I said.
And if I remember, you said that we should not accord it negative connotation.
Yes.
But I see, according to the author, when he called it Hatanim Gedolim, you know, it's something big.
Yes,
and
so,
it's a bit scaring. So when people negate it, I think they are somehow right, because you see creatures and it is big and it is great, it is scaring. I have ever lived on the sea and the lake, so anything big in the lake, there is nothing big in lake or sea which is not scaring. And majority are dangerous. Majority are dangerous.
Yes.
The hippo, the sharks, anything big in the lake, and it is very, majority are dangerous. There are few that are friendly.
Yeah,
So,
but do you see, in the beginning of the creation, all the creation was friendly to people, including tannin. And
yes.
it is clear that we cannot exclude them from the Barak formula, blessing formula. Vayvrach Otem Elohim lemor Peru urevu milu et hamayim. So be fruitful, hamayim bayamim. So it is clear that everybody is included in this blessing formula, including tannin, and the fact that they are used also in Psalm 148 in a positive context tells us that in fact they are good. They were created good. They were not created bad, or it is not in the creation. They are not related to anything bad. But later on, we can see that Nahash tempted people, and Nahash is cursed. And after that, we can see that tannin is associated with Leviathan, with something like very dangerous creature, and nobody can deal with Leviathan except God Himself. And one more thing that I would like to mention here is again the story about the new creation. And in Revelation 21 and verse 1, it says that there will be no sea. And what does it mean that there will be no sea? There will be no any sea creatures that were created on the day number 5, including Leviathan, including tannin, including all this kind of animals. And most probably, as I see, this is later on in the Bible, tannin was, or Leviathan was a symbolical representation of the source of evil, or we can also say the symbolical representation of Satan. By the way, if we speak about that, it's very interesting to touch the book of Job. And do you remember in the book of Job also Leviathan is mentioned. And Leviathan is mentioned as also as a big sea creature, and only God can manage it. Only God can fish it and put him out of the water. And some scholars say that this reference to Leviathan is actually part of the answer. It's true, it's part of the answer that God, when God replies Job to his complaints. And some scholars say that by referring to Leviathan, God wants to tell Job and to others that there is a Satan, and nobody can deal with Satan except God himself. So some people, some scholars try to put equal, to quote Leviathan with the Satan, And in Revelation, we can find this reference that there will be no more sea. So if there will be no more sea, there will be no more this source of evil, because according to this understanding, evil is somewhere in the depth of the sea. Okay, is it clear now, or we need to speak more about that?
It is clear. But I was asking about, there's a commentary you said we should read. Can you provide a link?
Commentary,
or is it
what
among
kind
the
of
material?
commentary? What do you mean?
When you're commenting about Jack Ducan's comments about this same text, you said there is somebody who has written a good book, though we don't agree with everything, but we should read it.
Oh, Silhammer, Pentateuch as narrative.
Yes, Lamed.
Yes. Is it in the folder? I can put it in the folder. You can read it.
Please.
Yes.
Professor,
yes.
Let me take you back to verse 20, just to help me understand the tannin issue. I'm reading the English version. Verse 20, then God said, let the waters abound with an abundance of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the face of the firmament of the heavens. Then 21, so God created great sea creatures and every living thing that moves, with which the waters abounded. So where I needed clarity is when we talk of this Tanim, is it including the abundance of living creatures which is mentioned in verse 20? So such that I asked, is it referring to one animal or everything that is found in the sea?
Yes, so what you are asking about, can we say that tannin is just a general term for everything that lives in the sea? Am I correct?
Okay.
Yes, from that.
Do you want to ask this one?
No, now it is clear.
Because we see, it looks like it is not. It is not.
Yeah.
Yeah, we cannot say that tannin is just a general term that specifies everything that lives in the sea. Because we see here that so God created the great sea creatures. So
yes,
and it is emphasized that this is great, something great, not just everything that is swarming in the water, but something that is great. And every living creatures that moves, with which the waters swarm. So it looks like here the author singled out the tannin, and he added that he created tannin, and in addition he created all other creatures that live in the sea. So that is why it is surprising, because tannin, this creature is singled out among all other creatures. But the text doesn't say that tannin is bad. On the contrary, in the end, we can see that tannin is blessed. And the question is, why the tannin is singled out. And maybe, as I said, it is an anticipation of the full narrative, and we can see that most probably one of the tannin, Nahash, is the one who tempted the first people. So that is why most probably it is mentioned here, especially because there is no other reason why it should be mentioned.
Yeah, now it is clear. It is clear now. I've understood that it is singled out. It is not a general term for all sea creatures. Yeah, that is where my problem was. But thank you. I have found it.
Okay.
I got it.
Yeah, Prof, one more thing.
Yes.
Yeah, as regards the Masoretic mark that excludes the tannin from God's blessing. What do we have in older manuscripts?
So do you see in older manuscripts? What do you mean older manuscripts? We have,
I mean, older ones.
Masoretic text, and in Masoretic text, of course, we have the cantillation signs. We have Dead Sea Scrolls, and in the Dead Sea Scrolls, we don't have any vowels at all. Okay. So in order for us, we also could have Samaritan Pentateuch, and we can look at Samaritan Pentateuch, how they interpret it. And we also can look at Septuagint, and we can see how the Septuagint translates this text.
Okay.
Yeah, so that is why we can compare. By the way, let us look at the Septuagint. It's interesting. I didn't look at earlier. This is 121. Yeah, it's just just a minute.
But Prof.
Just a minute, yes.
Prof.
Yes.
As you are searching, we have been jumping on pulpit, sweating, saying that it is only a human being that God created. He touched and created. But now I have got a new revelation that Tanim, God also created.
You mean the word bara?
Yes, because of bara. We thought it works only for man and because all these other things we see God saying, let it be, as a, but now with Tanim,
So Septuagint, do you see, interprets it very clear, in very simple way. Ta kiti or kete, yes. So it depends how we read this this word. It is like very similar to whale, and that is why most probably one of the translation, which one, the King James version, interprets it as whale, because most probably they just consulted the Septuagint, and because Septuagint interprets it as whale, so they do the same. We can also look at Samaritan Pentateuch. Let me try to find. So we remember this slide, this site that Pastor Abitana showed to us. And here, I don't remember how, but it is he was able to find the Hebrew text and English, no, ancient. Hebrew. Codex Aleppo, Samaritan Pentateuch. Oh, I cannot see. Okay, let us see the translation just. And God created great whales. No, it's most probably this is not.
Go up there where it is written SP.
Oh, Samaritan
go back.
Pentateuch English.
Yes.
And we don't need Samaritan Pentateuch English, we need just Samaritan Pentateuch in the original text.
Yeah, up there, when you go back, you,
Okay, Pastor
I think
Nathan,
there's a search.
I will stop sharing. Can you do the same?
No,
Maybe.
it will take me time. My internet is not good also.
Okay, so where shall I go?
Back. Yes. Here, ESV there. And then,
Okay, maybe here. Okay, so let us
Yeah.
do like this. Oops. But it doesn't show. Maybe I should remove it. Oh, yes.
Yes.
I think you need to
Samaritan
fill it
Pentateuch.
in there.
Yeah.
Yes.
We
Yeah.
found it finally.
Yes, that is.
How to make it bigger? Oh no.
Remove this. Yeah. That
So
one now.
Vaibra Elohim et Hataninim. So do you see the Samaritan Pentateuch put Yod here? Hagedolim. V'et kol nefesh ha'haya haremashet asher sharetzu hamayim. So what they change, they just put this missing Yud here, and everything is the same. So we cannot find any additional information here. Okay, let us try to see. There is also Codex Aleppo. Aleppo. So it would be interesting to see how they put their marks. Okay. Maybe here. Oh yeah, here it is. But it is not localized. Okay, it is not vocalized. No, why? So it is the same as in a Hebrew text, so it doesn't have any changes. But Aleppo Codex should be vocalized. I don't know why it is not vocalized here. Okay. So anyway, we can also look at some Targums, and especially Targum on Kelos, and we can see how it interprets. Do we want to do it right now?
No problem. Let's look at it.
Targum on Kelos. Let us see.
Stakajura.
Chapter 1. So, do you see? Vayamar Adonai Yirchashun Maya Rechesh Nefsha. So in Targum and Kelas, they do not mention them at all. But they say about Rachash. Most probably this is the same word for swarm.
Look at verse 22. Verse 22 is there.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Clear, yeah. Vaibra Adonai Yat Taninaya Ravrevaya. Okay, so the big Tanim. Vayat Kol Nafsha Haita Direchusha Di Arhishu Maya. So it's clear, and he created, or Adonai created, the Tanim, the big Tanim, and all living soul. So you can see that even here in the Targum and Kelos, we can find the same. So God created the Taninim. Okay, yeah, it was useful, I think. Okay, shall we dwell a little bit more on that, or we can go further?
Let's move on, Prof.
Okay.
Yeah, let's move on.
Yes. So blessing formula, we can find that everybody is blessed. For the first time in the creation account, the notion of blessing appears in verse 22. The blessings of the creatures of the sea and sky is identical with the blessings of humanity, with the exception of the notion of dominion, which is given only to human beings. As soon as living beings are created, the notion of blessing is appropriate because the blessing relates to the giving of life. So what Selhammer says. So we can see that creation, so the blessing, the fact that they are blessed, tells us that actually the creation was good. It was not bad. And God creates, or God blesses all that have this living soul. And the similar blessings is given just to be fruitful and multiply and fill the waters. Okay. So day number 6. So let us make a break now, and we will continue after the break. What do you think?
Thanks, Prof.
Yeah.
It's good.
So now let us move to day 6 of creation. And you know that on this day, the animals were created and people were created. First of all, let us discuss the creation of animals. And the creation of animals is different from the creation of plants. And we can see that the formula that is used is very similar. The command in the beginning was given, and God said, let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed and fruit, trees bearing fruit. And when we look at the command that is given on day 6, we can see that it is very similar. And God said, let the earth bring forth living creatures according to their kinds. But the difference is that later on we can see that earth produced all the vegetation. But when we look at day 6, the command was given to the land, but God himself created all the animals. And Silhammer explains it and says, apparently the author wants to show that though the command was the same for the creation of both the vegetation and the living creatures on land, the origin of the two forms of life was distinct. Vegetation was produced from the land, but the living creatures were made by God himself. Life stems from God and is to be distinguished from the rest of physical world. So this is how Silhammer explains the creation of animals. Now, when we speak about the creation of man, so several issues are involved in the description in the creation of man. So the formula of creation of man is different. So if before God said, let there be, now he says, let us make. And second, whereas throughout the previous account, the making of each creature is described as according to its own kind, the account of humankind's creation specifies rather that the man and woman were made according to the likeness of God. So, and this is the big difference. All the animals were made according to their kind or according to its own kind, but people were created according to the image and likeness of God. So here we can see the difference. And third, the creation of humanity is specifically noted to be creation of male and female. We know that animals were also created male and female, but it is not stated in the narrative. But here it is emphasized that God created both man and woman. And the author has not considered gender to be an important feature to stress in his account of the creation of the other forms of life, but for humankind it is of some importance. Thus, the narrative stresses that God created humankind as male and female. And fourth, only human beings are given dominion in God's creation. So not anybody else except human beings. And now we need to discuss one important issue, and this is the issue of image of God. Because only people were created according to the image of God. And of course, this concept of image of God and likeness of God is very, very, I wouldn't say controversial, but there were many, it produced a lot of debates among the scholars to understand what it means. Oops, sorry. Just a minute, please. Scholars suggested several explanations of this phrase, and all these explanations are listed here. For example, that God speaks to creation, to heaven and earth, that it is a plural indicating divine majesty, thinking with oneself, appeal to the angels, and the fifth one, conversation between persons of the divine. And if we discuss all of them, by the way, if you read some of the commentaries, it depends on who is the author of the commentary. If the author of the commentary is of Jewish origin or tries to defend the perspective of the Judaism, perspective of Judaism, so most probably he will say that it is appeal to the angels or God speaks to creation, to heaven and earth. But of course, it doesn't make sense because this explanation could be easily ruled out because God says, let us create in our image, in our likeness. So in this case, it is assumed that God, people were created in the image and likeness of God, not in the image and likeness of all creation or image and likeness of angels, but image and likeness of God. So if we speak about plural indicating divine majesty, it was a very, very common explanation of this phrase, but the problem is that in Hebrew language, this category is absent. So it is very common in Western languages when we use plural as a honorific plural, they can say, but it is completely absent in the Hebrew Bible, because in the Hebrew Bible, nobody addresses God in plural, but always in singular. Thinking with oneself is also not very plausible here, because it is not clear why he speaks us, so it doesn't explain anything. So the only option that remains is conversation between persons of the divine or persons of the Godhead. There is a very interesting story in Bereshit Rabbah, and in this Bereshit Rabbah, this is a very Jewish way to explain those things. According to the legend, when the prophet Moshe was writing the Torah from the mouth of the Most High, he stopped at the moment and asked, Lord, why do you say, let us make, if I know that you are one? Will not imperfect heads stumble on this? To this God answered his prophet, right. The one who is destined to stumble will stumble, but smart people will ponder. So this is a very interesting story in the Genesis Rabbah that actually doesn't explain anything, but it provokes us to think about it. Okay, now let us go to the image of God and let us discuss this issue about the image of God. So we have two words here. The word translated image is the Hebrew word tselem, and the word likeness is the Hebrew word demut. And of course, there were many debates among the scholars about how to interpret these two words. Shall we interpret it as a hendiadis? So it means image and likeness describe one thing, or we need to understand it as a separate issues, like image one thing and likeness is another thing. Image tselem is very common to the word which is like a statue. So that is why many scholars, especially in antiquity, emphasized that tselem is anthropomorphological similarity. They emphasize anthropomorphological similarity between God and man. Septuagint and Vulgate insert the conjunction "and" between these words. Because of this, it seems that these words mean different concepts. However, the Hebrew text makes it clear that there is no significant difference between the two terms. So when we compare different occurrences of these two verbs or these two terms, it became clear that these two terms are used as synonymous, and we cannot say that image is something different from likeness, but most probably it is like hendiadis, so two terms that designate one entity. So look at Genesis 1:26, both words are used. So when God says, let us make a man in our image, in our likeness. In the next verse 27, we can see that only the word image is used. In verse 5:1-2, only the word likeness is used. In Genesis 5:3, two words only in different order. In Genesis 9:6, only the word image is used. So all this usage of the verb of these words demut and tselem actually invites us to tell that it is the same idea which is described with two different terms. So it is clear that they are used interchangeably, and if they are used interchangeably, so they are synonymous, and we cannot say that image constitute one thing and likeness another. Also, these words are used synonymously. There is little difference in their meaning. The Hebrew word image, tselem, comes from the root meaning to cut or to sculpt, and that is why it is very clear, very similar to a sculptured image. And the Hebrew word for likeness is dimut, comes from the root to be like. Thus, in Genesis 1, the image is also a likeness. The two words together say that man is the representative of God on earth, who in many ways resembles God himself. Also, I just want to emphasize once again that Psalm 8 sheds some light on the meaning of this image of God. And in this psalm, we can see that that man is described as created a little bit lower than God himself. Although many translations use the word angels, that God created man just a little bit lower than angels, but in the Masoretic text, and there is no reason to think that it is not correct. So in Masoretic text, the word Elohim is used. So that is why the conclusion is that God created man in the image and likeness of God. So it means that a man was just a little bit lower than God himself. Yeah. And another important issue that we need to discuss is image and likeness after the fall. Was it remained after the fall or not? And many scholars suggested different interpretation of this. For example, Dutch theologian Klaas Schilder argued that God created man in his image, but this does not mean that he allowed man to remain the image of God after the fall. Thus, after the fall, a person does not carry any image of God, but in the future he can again be an image of God. Berkouwer and Brunner share the same view. Berkouwer also adds that the image of God becomes visible in the life of a new person described in New Testament, the one who let down his self, knew Christ, and was taught by him. So this idea is very popular, and many modifications of those ideas you can find in the works of the theologians. But what conclusion we can make is that man continues to be the image of God even after the fall. According to Genesis 9:6, man remains the image of God. Of course, after sin, human nature became perverted and corrupted, but this didn't affect the image of God in man. So what I would like to say that, and Genesis 9:6 tells us about this, that image of God remains in people after the fall, but this image of God was, of course, corrupted or distorted. But anyway, all of us are still bearers of this image of God. And yes, Irenaeus believed that the likeness to God was lost, while the image of God in man was preserved. But Irenaeus was the one, and it was very common in the first church, in the first centuries of the church history, to differentiate between image and likeness. Lost likeness is restored in man through atonement. For Irenaeus, the image of God means the ability to think rationally and the possession of freedom of choice, something that was not lost during the fall. Berhoff distinguished between the image of God in the narrow and broad sense. In a narrow sense, the image of God consists of spiritual qualities with which man was created, namely true knowledge, righteousness, holiness. The image in a broader sense means spiritual essence, rational, spiritual, and immortal. Thus, if the image in its narrow sense was completely lost, the image of God in its broad sense was not completely lost, but was preserved, perverted by sin. So do you see there are many different ideas about that, but what we can say that the image of God remained, but it was distorted. It was perverted in every human being. Okay, let us discuss now 3 views on the image of God that we can find in the history, and I took this information from Millard Erickson's book on the doctrines, and I just very briefly explain to you these 3 views on the image of God, and after that, just very briefly, we will do the conclusion of this section made by Erickson. So actually he says that there were 3 major views on the essence of the image of God: the substantive view, a relational view, and functional view. Substantive view is the oldest one, and most of the church fathers shared this view. According to this view, the common element in the several varieties of this view is that the image is identified as some definite characteristics or quality within the makeup of the human. Some have considered the image of God to be an aspect of our physical or bodily makeup. Although this form of the view has never been widespread, it has persisted even to this day. It may be based on a literal reading of the word "seven," which in its most concrete sense means statue or form. Given this reading, Genesis 1:26 would actually mean something like, "Let us make human who look like us." So the idea is that we have some qualities or some features, physical or psychological or spiritual, which are the same as God has. So we are very similar to God. So it doesn't mean that we are only anthropomorphological similar to God, but because we have this ability to think, ability to believe, ability to do some other things. So that is what constitutes the image of God in us. On the basis of Genesis 1:26-27, and tendency gradually developed to understand the image and likeness as 2 aspects of dimensions of the image of God. Origen, for example, saw the image as something given immediately at the creation, with the likeness to be conferred by God at a later time. It was Irenaeus, whom we mentioned already, who gave the distinction between image and likeness, a direction that theologians followed for some time, although his statements vary greatly and are not completely consistent. By the former, he meant that Adam had reason, so image means that Adam had reason and free will. By the latter, means likeness, Irenaeus pointed to some sort of supernatural endowment that Adam possessed through the action of the Spirit. Unlike some later theologians, Irenaeus was not thinking of an original righteousness. As a childlike being, Adam bore a likeness to God that was present only in germ form, only as a potential of what he was to become. When, however, Adam fell into sin, he lost the likeness, although the image persisted at least to some degree. So this is the substantive view, and of course, in the first church, as we said, they tried to distinguish between image and likeness, and they said that these are 2 different qualities or features of this concept. In medieval scholastic theologians, Irenaeus' distinction was developed further. Now the difference was clarified and the effects of the fall isolated. The image was the human's natural resemblance to God, the powers of reason and will. The likeness was a donumum superadditum, a divine gift added to basic human nature. This likeness consisted of the moral qualities of God, whereas the image involved the natural attributes of God. When Adam fell, he lost the likeness, but the image remained fully intact. Humanity was still complete, but the good and holy being was spoiled. So this is just a continuation of the same idea. But Martin Luther, he probably was the first one in the long story of the interpretation of this idea who didn't see the difference between image and likeness. He understood it as we understand it today, that it is a Hebrew parallelism, and in this case, it means the same. So image and likeness means the same. With this view of the image of God, Luther held that all aspects of the image of God in humans have been corrupted. Not one remained and one was lost, but everything was corrupted. What is left is a relic or remnant of the image, not certain qualities, but fragments, as it were, of all of what constituted the likeness to God. Luther's response to Genesis 9:6 was the uncorrupted image still exists as God's intention for humans, but is not actually present in them. And Calvin was of the same idea. All of the substantive views agree in one particular, the locus of the image. It is located within humans as a resident quality or capacity. Although conferred by God, the image resides in humans, whether or not they recognize God's existence and his work. Okay, is it clear? Or any other discussion about the substantive view?
Am I getting it clear when you say it was that man was viewed to resemble God in two ways? Or did I get you clearly?
Yes. So the idea is that man resembles God. In some, it could be physical form, or it could be some kind of his capacity, like reasoning, believing, and some other things like this. So it combines all this stuff. So we resemble God.
Thank you.
So, but as I said, in the history, there are many different ideas about the image of God, and mostly in the medieval church, they differentiated between image and likeness, and they believed that image remained, but likeness was lost. Shall we go further?
Yes, Prof.
Yes, Professor.
Yes, the relational view. So this is a modern interpretation of the image of God, mostly done by Karl Barth and Brunner. And many modern theologians do not conceive of the image of God as something resident within human nature. Indeed, they do not ordinarily ask what the human is or what sort of a nature a human may have. Rather, they think of the image of God as the experiencing of a relationship. Humans can be said to be in the image or to display the image when standing in particular relationship, which indeed is the image. For example, Emil Brunner distinguished between two senses of the image of God, the formal and the material. The formal image is the humanum, that which makes a person human, distinguishing the human from the animal as a rational being, responsible and free. Persons are sinners, have not lost this aspect of the image of God. In fact, the ability to sin presupposes it. This is what is meant by the Old Testament description of humans as being in the image and likeness of God. So he distinguished between two kinds of the image of God, the formal and the material. And the formal is always in the man, so man cannot lose the formal component of this aspect, but the material can be lost. The material sense of the image is the act of response, the relationship with God. The material image can be present or absent, but the formal image is always present. Even the person not responding to God still has responsibility. Beyond the human's relationship to God, there is a second command, that we love other human beings. Our responsibility in love begins to be met as we relate to our fellow humans. We cannot be human by ourselves. So just to put it in simple words, the formal image is something that remains in us forever, but the material image is our response to God. And material image could be present or not. So if I respond to God, I am in a relationship with him. And in this case, I am an image of God in a broader sense. If I do not respond, so in this case, I do not have this material image. Karl Barth also held a relational view of the image of God. He especially sees the demonstration of the image of God in the male-female relationship, so that the statement male and female created he them is in effect a parallel to the statement that God created humans in his own image. The image of God is not to be understood in terms of any structural qualities within humans, so they were against the substantive view. It is not something a human is or possesses. Rather, the image is a matter of one's relationship to God. It is something a human experiences. Thus, it is a dynamic rather than static. The relationship of a human to God, which constitutes the image of God, is paralleled by the relationship between humans. The image of God is universal. It is found in all humans at all times and places. Therefore, it is present in sinful human beings, even in turning away from God. One cannot negate the fact of being related to God in a way in which no other creature is or can be. There is always a relationship, either positive or negative. So this is a relational view. Any questions about that?
So when he says that he's comparing the image with the relationship between man and woman, what exactly does he mean? Or does he mean just a normal verbal interaction? Or is it beyond that?
Just when we are in a relationship, so the relationship is the manifestation of this image of God, and especially the relationship between God and humans. So if we are in those relationships, it means that we have this image, we practice this image. And if we don't, we are not. But we need to remember that they differentiated between two kinds of image, the formal image and material image. So formal image, we cannot lose it. It is always with us. But the material image is our response to God. It is more like a philosophical idea. It is, do you see, it is not even related to the biblical texts. It is a human attempt to explain and to describe this kind of concept.
So does it therefore mean that if somebody is not married, then he can't relate well?
No. No. It is not about marriage. It is about relationship. So if a man was created like male and female, it expected some relationship between them. So that is why we are the image of God. So it is not related to the marriage. Yes, Pastor Nicholas.
I think there is some element of sense, though I feel it's just a component rather than the whole. Because when I was looking at the text, I wanted also to have your input. The movement from the plural to the singular in the Godhead, in the description, let us make, and then in the image of God, he made him, in his image, in other words, he made them. And also the movement from a singular in terms of man to a plural, male and female, he made them. I was wondering whether there was not an intention also showing, just in the same way the Godhead operates in a unitary sense, so man would to operate also as a unit, though they are plural in nature. So in that wise, couldn't this also be an understanding is trying to stretch that God intended also that the same kind of dynamics that operate within the Godhead that keeps the harmony would also be manifested within the relationship of man among themselves as a being.
Yes.
I don't know, Professor, what your reflection would be, but I only feel it's just a component. But the image of God, in the sense, it goes beyond just a simple aspect of relation.
Correct. So the problem of all those
values and whatever.
Yes, the problem of all this interpretation is just that they emphasize one particular feature, and we can say that the image of God is more complex. It is more broad than just relationship. It is more broad than just physical or any kind of similarity between man and God. So most probably what we can say that it is everything together. And what we will see it later on, how Erickson actually is more on the position of substantive view, and he says that all this other like relationship and relational and functional, it is just like it is a sequence, or it is something that comes from the substantive view. It emphasizes the results of the image of God, but not the image of God itself. And maybe we can agree with that. But anyway, the image of God is more than just something just one thing.
Yeah.
Yes.
Let me ask something, Prof.
Yes.
Yeah, looking at the grammar and the lexis of the context, and God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness." So there's an understanding of relational, working together. It's not just it's not just something static, because we see the Godhead working together in a cordial and harmonious relationship. And they also expected that to be exhibited in the male and female whom the Godhead created. So irrespective of the arguments in favor of substance, I see relational expectation in this context.
Yeah. So I just want to repeat again, so we cannot just limit the image of God to one definition, to one something one, but it is much more broader. And anyway, all these explanations are the approaches of people to explain this very, very complex issue about being an image of God. And what is also important, the Bible doesn't clarify it. The Bible doesn't tell us that the image of God is this or that. The Bible just tells us that we are the image of God. And I do not agree with some of the theologians who tell that we cannot lose the image of God. I think that it can be lost. Okay, so let us continue. Let us discuss the last view, and we can. Yes.
Sorry, but if the Bible does not tell us the image of God is this and that, then why do we have this notion of the image of God before fall and the image of God after fall?
Oh yeah. So yeah. This is the big issue in Adventist theology. about the image of God, and not about the image of God. So it's about the nature of Christ. This is the big issue. So what nature Christ had when he became a man? Was it the nature of Adam before the fall, or the nature of Adam after the fall? So this is the big issue of Adventist theology, but it used to be a big issue, and especially in like 1980s. But it looks like now it is already resolved, and theologians came to the consensus, although there are many views are still present that say that Christ had a nature of a man after the fall. So do you want to go in this direction right now, to speak about that? Do you have any questions about that?
Especially if we can have biblical allusions or indicators that show us what could be the possible image, then that's what we can help us see.
So again. So no. I just asked you about. Do you want to discuss this issue about the nature of Christ? So it is beyond our topic. We don't need actually to go in this direction. It is mostly about Christian theology and views on Christ.
Okay. Now I'm only saying if it is in your considered view that you can give us some glimpse, we are fine. You can just...
Yes, okay. So what I want to tell you is just the consensus that we have is that the nature of Christ was unique. It was neither the nature of Christ before, or nature of Christ, or nature of Adam before, or nature of Adam after the fall. It was kind of unique nature. So why they say like this? Because of real opposition and dichotomy that heated those debates about the nature of Christ. If you stand on one position, so it will be a problem. If you stand on another position, it will be also a problem. Like, for example, it is clear that if we accept the position that Christ's nature was the nature of Adam before the fall, so it means that Christ didn't understand all the problems and the burden of sin that we have right now. So because his nature was perfect, it was just before the fall, so he can easily resist the temptations. So if we stand on this view, if we stand on another view that Christ had the nature of Adam after the fall, in this case, it is clear that he can be compassionate to us because he had the same nature as we have. But the problem of this view is that from this we can make a conclusion that Christ was a sinner. Because what does it mean? What does sin mean? It doesn't mean just an act or a thought. The sin is rooted in our nature. So if he had a sinful nature, it would automatically mean that he is a sinner. And we cannot accept this either. So like these two views that are non-acceptable for the Adventists and for the Christians. So that is why the conclusion to this is that Christ had a unique nature. It was a nature, and Ellen G. White says very much about that. It was a nature of that was weakened by the sin, but he didn't have any propensities or any inclinations to sin. So this is our like an official, we can say, position. And there are many advocates of this position among the modern. Most probably the one of the best defender is Woodrow Weedon, our Adventist theologian, who is now retired, and actually he's like a main. He wrote a lot about this, and he taught a lot about this. So this is one of the his main positions. Yes. So do you have any other questions about that? But I just want to tell you, it is not the question of our class. It is mostly about its doctrinal issue. And when you go to this direction, there are many other ideas that were proposed during the church history, Adventist church history, about the nature of man, especially this final generation idea by Andreasen, some others that, of course, now church doesn't accept them, but some like echoes of those ideas you can find even in our today's churches. Yeah, anything about that?
So, Prof,
Yes.
in one sentence, the image of God does, our likeness to God does not concern the physical appearance.
Oh yeah. So this one, it is just how to say. Yes, of course, we cannot say that physical appearance is the main feature. Although God, in many places, in many texts, is described anthropomorphologically. So it looks like God also has head, eyes, and everything else. But of course, we cannot say that this is the main issue in the image of God. Because do you see, Darwin said that we are very similar to a monkey, to a chimpanzee. And chimpanzee also has very the same appearance, or very similar to a man. But chimpanzee is not the image of God, but man is an image of God. So in this case, we cannot say that the morphological or anthropomorphological issue is important in the question of the image of God. So it is something more than just the physical similarity. Okay? Okay, let us continue and let us finish. And if you have some more questions, so we can come back to it. In the functional view, this is the idea that the image is not something present in the makeup of the human, not the experiencing of relationship with God or the fellow humans, but rather consists in something one does. It is a human function, the most frequently mentioned being the exercise of dominion over the creation. While the relational view gives relatively little attention to the content of the image of God, this view attempts to determine from the biblical text itself the content of the image. In Genesis 1:26, the statement, "Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness," is followed immediately by, "so that they may rule over the fish of the sea." A close connection between these two concepts is found not only in this verse, where God expresses his intention to create, but also in verse 27-28, where we read that God did in fact create humans in the image of God and issue to them a command to have dominion. Some regard the juxtaposition of these two concepts as more than coincidental. The exercise of dominion is considered to be the content of the image of God. This was propounded by the Socinians and included in the Rakovian Catechism, as God is the Lord over all of creation, humans reflect the image of God by exercising dominion over the rest of the creation. The image of God is actually an image of God as Lord. Okay, so this is also a Psalm, according to this position, also confirms the same idea, that the image of God is that man can exercise dominion. Biblically speaking, the phrase image of God has nothing to do with the morals or any sort of ideals. It refers only to man's dominion of the world and everything that is in it. It says nothing about the nature of God, but everything concerning the function of man. So this is the functional view. And Erickson makes a conclusion, and I just want to make it very brief. And if make it brief, so it has like two components. He says actually that image of God is much more than just one view, but he stands on the position that, on the substantive view position. And he says that all other positions are just consequences or are results of being the image of God. So because we are image of God, we are social beings, we are relational, we have some relationship with others. Because we are the image of God, we exercise dominion. So that is why he is more inclined to the substantive position. I just want to, you can read it later on. It is nothing special in this. But what I would like to emphasize in the end of this presentation is that actually what I believe we can lose the image of God. And just a minute, please. Where is it? So why I believe that we can lose the image of God, I mostly make this statement because of the flood story. And when we read the flood story, what we can see in the flood story, that God completely destroyed the first humanity, the first mankind after the creation. And when we read Genesis chapter 9, what happened immediately after the creation, so what we can see that God prohibited killing other people. So he prohibited, it's very clear. And why he prohibited killing people? Mostly because, as it is clear from the narrative, that it was the problem of the antediluvian world. And it is clearly seen in the narrative, like, for example, the description of Lamech, who killed 2 people and who is boasting because of that, or the description of the antediluvian world, that people violated were people of violence, people who could be considered the military people, so they kill each other. So it was a problem of the antediluvian world. A man killed each other. And immediately after the flood, God said, you cannot kill. You shouldn't kill. And if you shed blood, I will avenge for this. So God, who says that killing other people is prohibited, of course, cannot himself violate his own command. So in this case, we need to explain somehow why did God give a command or said that all the creation will be destroyed, will be completely destroyed. So in this case, I can have only one explanation for this. God cannot destroy or kill somebody who is his image. It is against his nature. So, but what happened to the people of the antediluvian world is that they completely destroyed the image of God in themselves. And when a person stopped to be the image of God, So in this case, he is not human anymore. He is just like an animal. And that is why God said that it is time to destroy all the humanity, all the mankind, because they are not image of God anymore. And of course, it tells us a very important issue about what it means to be a man, because to be a man, to be human, means to be the image of God. And if we continue sinning, sin destroys image of God in us. And in this case, I just want to make just some, just to go aside from our topic, but I like very much Oscar Wilde novel, which is called The Picture of Dorian Gray. And in this, of course, it's just fiction, it is not true, but he describes very well what it means to lose this image of God. So that the person, when he commits some sins, his portrait is distorted, and finally it became like a beast. It became like something terrible. Okay, so any questions about that?
So, Prof, in summary, what is the image of God? Man created in the image and likeness of God. Is it that man relates and the physical aspect can be ignored? And if that is
I would
the
say
case,
that everything is included in this idea, in this concept, everything. So we can say that all three concepts can be put together in order to describe the image of God. And it's very difficult to find a metaphor or equivalent to describe what the image of God is. To be man means to be the image of God. So I cannot answer this question. I cannot say that this is only just this one, or we can exclude this one. So what I say when Pastor Kajura asked, I said that we cannot say that physical likeness is the essence of the image. Yes, and it's really true. It's not the essence of the image of God. So something else should be important when we speak about the image of God. Okay.
Hey, Prof.
Yes.
I need more light
Okay.
on the likeness, image and likeness.
Okay.
Are they different things, or are they similes? Because, after the fall, God said the man has become like us. So wasn't he like God when he was created?
Okay, yes, it's a good question that you asked. So do you see when we come to this text, let us speak about it a little bit more, and I hope that we will come to it very soon. So the main idea is that when Satan approached Adam and Eve, he actually said that when you eat from the fruit, you will be like gods or like Elohim, yes? But the problem is that when we speak about this concept, image of God, so man was already like Elohim when he was created in the image of God. So do you understand? So this is a kind of irony that man shouldn't eat from the tree of knowledge in order to become like God, because they were already like God, because they were created in the image and likeness of God. So do you understand this? And when we speak about this verse, when that God says, behold, man became like one of us. Yes. So here the same verb haya is used. The same verb haya is used. And just, I don't want to explain now more, but I just to invite you to think about it. Do you remember we spoke that the verb haya could be translated differently? It could mean haya was, or it could mean haya become. So in this case, the translators used the second meaning, become. Behold, the man became as one of us. But let us think what would be if we translate the same verse with the meaning was. Behold, man was like one of us. Is it possible or not? And how does it change the whole concept of being the image of God? So what do you think?
Yeah, if we take higher to become, then it means it's like they were not in the image of God in creation when they were created.
No, it
So
would
they are,
mean that Satan was correct.
yeah, it would mean Satan was correct. So to me,
man
I would
became
go
like
with
one of us. So it means
yes,
that Satan didn't lie. They will
yeah,
become. They became like Elohim. But if you take another
yes,
possibility, of course, I would be honest with you. When you compare the translation, I didn't see anybody who take this route and translate it as, behold, the man was like one of us. Most probably because later on, the next statement says, now lest he stretch his hand and eat from the tree of life. But maybe just think about it. Maybe we can just look at the syntax once again, and maybe we can accommodate this translation as well. And in this case, the statement of God would be, man was like one of us. But now, if he stretch his hand and eat from the fruit of life, so it would mean that he, in this condition, not being an image of God anymore, no. In this sinful condition, he will live forever. So maybe we can accommodate this translation as well. Okay. Do we need a break or any other questions? And do we need a break, or we can go to the next stage, to the next part of our lecture?
Maybe a brief break.
Okay, let's make a break, just 5 minutes. Now let's go to Genesis chapter 2. And now we will have very, very important issue. And if we are not able to do it today, we will do it tomorrow. We need to come to this text in Genesis chapter 2, verses 5 and 6, and discuss the meaning of those texts. Because as you saw, this text became like a crux interpretum, or the most important issue, especially for the framework theory, because they believe in some of the modification of the framework theory, they believe that Genesis 2 account is not is not a repetition of the account of Genesis 1, but is the sequential account. Especially John Walton believes in this, so this is the sequential account. And also they believe that the state of the earth that is described here is the parallel account. So they believe that this is a parallel account, also some other modifications, but they also try to use this verse as an argument